the health of my Airbnb business. That is the subject of this video. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do something that probably a lot of people don't do. Is I'm actually going to show you the revenues on one of my platforms. And just to put some context into this, I advertise or market on 5 different platforms. The platforms are Booking.com, VRBO, HomeAway, Expedia, and Airbnb. I'm showing you Airbnb only because Airbnb has the platform is actually easier to read, and it is the majority of my business. Airbnb does dominate the vacation rental or short-term rental market in South Florida. So that's why I'm showing you this. Here's what's important. Here's one of the interesting factors that has happened during the pandemic, and I'll explain as to why things are happening or why I believe they're happening and why I had such great growth during this pandemic. But first, we'll start pre-COVID-19. As you can see, January and February. And if I go back to 2019, my average monthly income was between $33,000 and $35,000 a month. COVID-19 hit, as everybody knows. We start to hear about it in February. In March, the president banned travel from Europe, and then the rest everybody knows. But as you can see, I was pretty consistent for January, February. March, I took a dip, a small dip, but nonetheless a dip. I only made $28,000 for that month. But April, I got done. April was literally half of what I normally made, which is $14,000. And I'll explain why I survived and why I did well. But nonetheless, I'll explain that a little bit later on this video. May, what happened between April and May is the following. Number one, I pivoted, and I'll explain exactly what I did. But once I pivoted to the strategy that I'm going to explain, you'll start to see the steady increase. So May, I went from $14,000 in April up to $24,000 in May. June, I jumped up a little bit more to $28,000. But in July, when everything went in full effect, I doubled my income. In July, I'll give you the actual numbers, the current numbers, because July is still not over. But the current numbers for July, $63,870 only on the Airbnb platform, just to keep that in mind, because there's other revenues coming in from the other platforms. And I'll explain what's happening with future bookings. But as you can see, for August, we're already up to $26,000 for August. And we expect, based on the current trends, to surpass the $70,000 mark for August. So as you can see, the health of my business is pretty good, especially in the last couple of months. But here's why I think that happened. First and foremost, if you are any type of investor, but specifically if you're in the Airbnb business, you always have to plan for the worst. So in all my properties, I keep plenty of reserves. Those reserves, even though I did not have to tap into them, they were there for the ready when this pandemic hit. So that's number one. Number two, you gotta be able to pivot. Pivoting on the fly is extremely important. You got to be flexible as a business person, right? As an entrepreneur, if you don't pivot quickly, you might get left behind. Okay, tip number 3 is marketing. One of the things that you're going to have to do or should do is market to a different audience. So for example, when the pandemic hit and the travel ban stopped or was in place, we couldn't receive travelers from Europe. We couldn't receive travelers from New York, from Chicago. So what I did was I marketed to locals and I marketed to workers, for example, travel nurses. Travel nurses are a very good segment of the population. You should be marketing, especially if your properties are around hospitals, like my properties are. So that's tip number 3, is change the focus of your marketing for longer stays, right? And again, what I just mentioned. The next 2 are not really tips, but stuff that you should, or not really tips, are reasons why we think we have excelled and grown during this pandemic. Number one, the mom and pop operator, as well as the rental arbitrage people, bailed out. They got scared. They didn't have the reserves. They didn't have the strategies in place to go through a situation like this pandemic. So that caused a decrease in inventory. In South Florida, there's currently about a 42% less vacation rentals than there were this time last year. So that in and of itself is going to give any current operator a boost. Now, be very careful because now we're getting more local people renting, which because they're local, they have a tendency to throw more parties or look for places to throw parties. So be very judicious. Have a very good team in place that, or if you're a single operator, make sure you are screening your guests. Like I am constantly on them for. My team understands what to look for people that are strictly looking to come to your property to throw a party. Most people will come, they may throw a party and not destroy your property, but you're going to start having problems with your neighbors because if there's a large party, vehicles and noise, your neighbor's going to get upset, and you want to keep your neighbors happy because if they're happy, you're going to have less stress in your life. So the next tip, and probably the last tip I'm going to give you for today, is make sure, and I'm going to go back to reserves, make sure when you buy your property that your property is able to do two things. Number one, sustain itself if you have to switch to a long-term rental, meaning don't buy strictly because vacation rentals are profitable. A lot of people overextended themselves with the understanding that they could make 2 or 3 times more as an Airbnb or a short-term rental than they can long-term, and completely dismissed the need to have a long-term tenant. Those people are struggling today because if they decided to switch back to long-term, or if for whatever reason they're not doing Airbnbs today, they're not going to be viable, right? So that's big. And then the last one is, like I said before, have plenty of cash reserves. If you have cash reserves, you're going to be able to sustain all the shortfalls or the lows in the business. Okay, I hope this video was helpful. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, post them below. And please follow us on Instagram.